Welcome to the cemetery. I'm Nathan Barnett, former gravedigger from spooky old New England, and you're watching Grave Stories. If you don't know, I have a podcast titled Grave Stories where I read true accounts, real ghost stories. So if you don't know about it, please go check it out. There's also Grave Stories Investigations on the Dad YouTube channel where we investigate and do more of a documentary style approach to strange subject matter. I have the plan and goal to upload longer episodes where I write a script based on a situation that I've researched, which is this episode. So I'd like to upload at least once a week an episode like this that I've written a script for. And I would also like to do some smaller, easier episodes where I'm just reading some scary stuff off of Reddit, because this is something I do a lot of. I'm always just reading spooky, creepy stories on Reddit. So maybe on Fridays, I put up some Reddit stories. And if there's a demand for it, I'll just keep pumping them out. I'd like to put up multiple episodes a week. So I hope you like it. I hope you like this episode. Thanks for being here. Halloween's coming. I'm very excited to get into spooky stuff. We got our pickaxe, our shovel, and our lantern, and we're in a spooky mood. Here we go, everyone. Time for Grave Stories. On February 24th, 1983, I had just celebrated my second birthday, only a few weeks before. Well, it was more of my parents celebrating, and I was probably just laying there not knowing what was happening. Also on February 24th, 1983, it was the day before my brother celebrated his fourth birthday. I'm sure he was at least aware of his surroundings more than I to enjoy some toys and cake. But on February 24th, 1983, someone else was celebrating a death day. 21-year-old Don Decker sat in a funeral parlor in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, staring at a dead body, the body of his grandfather, James Kishpaw. Don may not have been celebrating with singing and dancing, but I'm sure in his head he was pretty relieved that his grandfather was gone. He may have also been feeling good because he was allowed out of prison for a short period of time to attend the funeral and spend time with his family. Don was sentenced for 4 to 12 months in prison for receiving stolen goods. Now, Don wasn't necessarily a bad person or a criminal per se. He just sort of got mixed up in some trouble being an unguided young person. So Don was allowed to be out of prison to spend time with his family. Now, his grandfather was only 63 years old, but he had passed away from cirrhosis of the liver. Now, while the rest of the family was sad and mourning the death of James, the grandfather, Don, on the other hand, was not. Don described his grandfather as evil, and he was looking forward to his new life now that he was free of this violent oppressor. Now, no one else in the family knew about this abuse. So when the family told stories after the funeral and talked highly and fondly of the grandfather, it made Don uncomfortable. He didn't want to be around any of that. So instead, he went and stayed with his two friends, Bob and Jeannie. Bob and Jeannie were a married couple that Don had become friends with a few months earlier. At some point in the night, when hanging out with his friends, he suddenly changed. The air around him got cold and he felt chills all over his body. Then he fell into a sort of trance. He would still talk and respond to his friends, but he looked and acted differently. Then the air in the room became very moist and water started to drip from the ceilings and walls. They couldn't figure out where it was coming from. There couldn't be a leak because there were no pipes in that part of the house, and it wasn't raining outside. So Bob and Jeannie called their landlord, Ron. Ron, the landlord, came over and couldn't believe what he saw. Water was coming from everywhere, coming up from the floor, out of the walls, down from the ceiling. It was absolutely soaked in the entire living room. Now Ron, the landlord, who knew this house very well, was very confused by the situation. So he called his wife and the police to come check out what was going on. The police officer named John, who showed up, called his partner to show him and get another logical perspective on the situation. When Ron's wife and the other police officer entered the house, the strangest thing happened. Droplets of water moved through the people horizontally, through the air, past them, and into another room. But the water and moisture was only happening in this room. John, the police officer, said it made him so uneasy that it was giving him goosebumps and raising the hair on his neck. So the police decided to report the situation to their police chief. And at this point in the night, it had been hours since Don, Bob, and Jeannie had eaten. So they walked across the street to a pizza place. Now the landlord and his wife stayed behind inside the house. And once everyone left, the landlord said the water stopped dripping. It all just went away. So they were convinced that it was happening because it was connected to one of these people. Across the street at the pizza place, Don and his friends sat down to eat. The woman who owned the pizza place was named Pam, and she had come by the house earlier and saw the water herself. so she was aware of the situation. Pam was pretty religious, and she felt that Don was possessed. She commented on how Don looked and acted like he was in a trance. Then, after a few moments of them all sitting there in the pizza parlor, the water came back. It started dripping everywhere, just like previously in the house. Now, since Pam was religious, she of course had a crucifix nearby. She grabbed it out of the cash register and threw it around the neck of Don. As soon as she did, it burned his skin. Pam commented in her testimonial that this couldn't have been a prank. There's no way he could have faked that. They all saw his burning skin. I just want to take a moment to remind everyone that these are real people that experienced this, and their testimonials are very compelling because they do not seem at all like people who would embellish and make a story like this up. So many people saw this happening, and a lot of them aren't the type of people who would believe in this type of a weird thing, especially the police officers and the chief, and probably most compelling, the warden in the prison. But that will come later. The group finally left the pizza place and headed back across the street to the house. And of course, as soon as they left, so did the rain and the water. Once they walked back inside the house, the dripping started again, everywhere, soaking everything. The group started to get pretty frustrated, and they began accusing Don of doing this on purpose. They were shouting at him and telling him to stop, asking him why he was doing this, and they were just getting frustrated and annoyed with him and yelling at him. And then the energy in the room completely changed. The room became very tense and negative. That's when things got a lot scarier. With everyone yelling at Don, items in the room started moving. Pots and pans and kitchenware began shaking, items began banging against the walls, and Don himself rose up off the floor and levitated. This horrified everyone. Something was not happy with them. They all cried out in concern for Don. Then, suddenly, he was thrown across the kitchen and crashed onto the floor. In a testimonial, Don said it didn't feel like a normal shove. He felt it all over his body all at once. Some unknown source enveloped his body and tossed him like a doll. After a while, the police chief finally arrived. He was not very happy from being woken up in the middle of the night and did not want to be showing up to this house. So he was pretty grumpy. As soon as he walked into the house, he felt like it was a big joke and he didn't take it seriously. He didn't believe any of it, and he felt that the officers were being taken advantage of and made to look stupid. He wouldn't even let them file a report. He said that the incident wasn't real and it never happened. But both of the officers disagreed because they knew what they saw all night. The next day, 3 seasoned cops came over to the house to try and experiment. They placed a paper bag over Don's head so he couldn't see what was going on. They then put a metal cross in his hands, and instantly it burned his hands. An officer named Bill picked it up and he felt the heat on the cross. Then moments later, Don again levitated, rose up off the floor, and was thrown across the room into another wall. Then the cops ran over to him, they took the bag off his head, and they saw scratches down both sides of his neck, which drew blood, and blood was dripping down his neck. In his testimonial, one of the officers named Bill said he had never seen anything like this in his 40 years as a cop. There was always a way to investigate a situation and come to a conclusion, and this was the first time he couldn't figure out how any of this was happening. Now, on the next day, the third day of this bizarre phenomenon, the group reached out to many priests and ministers, but none of them would respond or say that they would be willing to come and help them with their situation. Except for one. An evangelical preacher said she would come and perform an exorcism. When the woman began to pray, Don started twisting and shaking and convulsing all over. But the longer she prayed, the more he began to calm down, and eventually he stopped. Not only did he stop convulsing, but the water and moisture all disappeared. This all happened in front of a room full of people. But a few days later, Ron's nightmare continued. His leave from prison ran up and he had to go back to jail to serve out the remainder of his sentence. When in prison, Ron was put in maximum security with another inmate, and that's where he thought, I should make it rain in here. After thinking about making the water reappear, it did. It came back. Water started coming out of the cement floor. Ron, for the first time, controlled his power and made it happen on purpose. When being questioned by a prison guard, he told the man he could control the rain. The guard didn't believe him at all. So the guard said, okay, why don't you go make it rain in the warden's office? So he did. The guard went into the warden's office, and the warden was sitting there. A wet spot started to grow on his chest. When the guard told the warden what was going on, that there was an inmate that said he can control the water, and he said he was doing this, the warden was so weirded out and perplexed that he called a reverend to come and help them. So the reverend showed up to the prison and sat in a room alone with Ron. They talked for a while, and Ron explained what was happening, and the reverend accused him of faking it and lying. As soon as he did this, everything changed. The energy, again, like in the kitchen, got negative, and the thing that was possessing Ron, probably his grandfather, got angry and didn't like what the Reverend was saying. The Reverend said he felt a change in the room and a smell appeared. He said it smelled like the room of a person on their deathbed in a hospital. Ron then lifted his hand and rubbed his fingers together, and just like that, it began to rain in the room. The Reverend didn't know what to do other than just start reading from his Bible. He said the situation was so frightening that he wasn't sure if he was reading more for himself or for Ron. Now, after only a few short moments of reading from the Bible, the rain stopped. Ron then embraced the Reverend with tears in his eyes and said thank you. The Reverend said in his testimony he had no doubt that he was possessed, and there was no way a human being could have done what he did in that room. That was the last time the rain happened. Ron feels it was the doing of his grandfather, who used to torture him when he was alive, and he was now torturing him from the grave. The paranormal experts that were involved in the situation all said that this was one of the most intriguing cases they'd ever been a part of because all the witnesses were so credible. Seasoned police officers and people with no history of lying or fabricating fantastic hoaxes or schemes. It was the most fascinating case that any of them had ever seen. Well, there you have it, everyone. The baffling case of the real-life Rain Man. Hope you enjoyed watching this episode. If you want more, please give a like. It really does help. And if you have any cases that you think are interesting and you would like me to cover, please let me know. There is a room in my Discord titled Spooky Stuff. Please comment and leave links in there. I read all of them. I'm always looking for more stories to cover, so please let me know what you think I should cover next. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe. It's been 16 years of me on YouTube, and I'm almost finally at 500,000 subscribers. Thank you for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time.